This is the Python notebook that covers chapter 6 of the textbook Mining Complex Network. This chapter is about graph embedding, more specifically the embedding of nodes or vertices in graphs. We're going to be using one tool that is written in Julia. So you're going to need to install the Julia executable, the Julia language, and also the tool itself, which is CGE, Compare Graph Embedding, is included within the book's GitHub repo, and I've also put the source of the tool itself. It's another GitHub repo. So as usual, you're going to need to point your directories to the proper location for the data set, but also in this case for the Julia language and for this Compare Graph Embedding tool or framework. Okay, so importing the usual required libraries and also a couple of useful functions. So let's go through this quickly. So this binary operator is a bunch of functions we're going to be using for link prediction, and they're taken the approach we're going to take is from this paper here. Read embedding, embed to layout, JS, and save embedding. Those are all JS is Jensen Shannon. So those are all utility function we're going to be using to interact with the Julia package to compute divergence for different embedding. So this is because we're going to be, so JS, for example, is going to use this sub-process package to run this Julia command, calling the embedding framework, and then we're going to get the results. We're also going to need functions to put the embedding in proper format that can be read by this CGE framework, and so for reading and for saving the embedding, and also this embed to layout is a utility function where embeddings are not necessarily going to be in two dimension. So if you want to visualize the result, then we're going to be using UMAP to map the results in two dimension. There's also a couple of embedding algorithms, so HOPE and Laplacian eigenmap. Node2vec, we're going to use a package that we've imported already. So that's the third embedding algorithm we're going to be using. And this is just a utility function to produce a nice LaTeX matrix, mainly for the textbook. And this cell is also to generate one of the plot in the book. Okay, so in the first part here, we're going to be using those four data sets. So this stored as iGraph objects, this small lowercase ABCD is going to be a small ABCD graph with 100 nodes, mainly for visualization. This capital ABCD1 is going to be a larger 1000 node ABCD graph with that is relatively noisy. So the Xi parameter is 0.6, while ABCD2 has similar parameters, but with much lower noise parameters. So the communities are well defined, more well defined for this second graph. And then a graph we've seen many times already, the Zachary Karate Club graph, we're going to use mainly for visualization and a few experiments also. Okay, so there's nothing new here. We're just loading a graph from the data directory and adding a couple of attributes like the communities and the size, the color, etc. So this is the 100 node small ABCD graph. You can see there's three communities, reasonably well defined. This is the same with the ABCD1, the larger 1000 node graph. We're using color in this case to look at the different ground truth communities, and you can see our layout algorithm has a hard time, putting the communities together because there's so much noise in this case. There's so many edges between the communities. I mean, they're kind of grouped together. You can look at this orange color is kind of in the same region, and this purple color and this, but nevertheless, it's not super clean as to what the communities are if we didn't have the colors, for example. While the second one, the communities are much more clear in this case. Okay, so in the book we discuss graph layouts, which you can view as a special case of an embedding in two dimension. Essentially, you can also have three-dimensional layouts, but we're going to be looking at two-dimension, mainly for visualization purpose. So we're going to be using the Zachary Karate Club graph, and the layout that is saved with the graph itself in the data directory is this so-called Fruchterman Reingold layout, which is probably one of the best layout for these types of graph with community or social networks. Okay, so you can see in this case we use colors for the two ground truth communities, and the layout, is pretty decent. Kamada Kawaii is another one that usually gives good results also for these types of graphs. Multidimensional scaling can also be a good choice. It may be not as good in this particular case. It's a matter of taste, I guess, and choice. There are more specific layouts like circular, for example. You may want to represent your graph as a circle or as a grid or as a tree or tree-like layout. So there's different. It's tree-like because it's not really a tree. So there's different choice and there's many, many more possibilities, but there's different ways to visualize a graph. And so again, layout, special case of an embedding of the vertices, mainly for a visualization purpose. Okay, so in our first experiment, in our first bit larger experiment, if you want, we're going to be looking at the Zachary graph, and we're going to run a whole bunch of embedding algorithms like node-to-vec, Hope, and Laplacian eigenmap, but with different parameters. We're going to be using different dimensions. For node-to-vec, we're going to vary the P and Q parameters, which are the two main parameters in the algorithm. Hope uses similarity functions, so we're going to be using different similarity functions. And we're going to do that. And let me actually run a couple of cells because it takes maybe a minute or so. So while we discuss what this function is doing, we'll have time to get the results. So this is a very simple function here that we're going to use to test the different embeddings. So in this case, we're going to decide which algorithm we want to run with the dimensions. Do we want to save the best embeddings with respect to local or global divergence? By default, it's going to be global, so local is going to be false. And for each of and so we're going to be storing those best and worst divergence on disk, so we can use them later on to display, the results. We're also going to be storing the statistics, the values of the divergence for every test that we're going to run. So for example, if we want to run the Hope algorithm, we're going to loop to the dimension, we're going to loop to the similarity function. For each case, we're running the algorithm, we're saving the embedding, that's one of our utility function, in a format that this Julia tool can handle. And then we're going to call this Julia tool for the framework to compute the divergence and store those. So this is going to be a two-dimensional object that has the global and the local divergence. And then we're going to take either the local or the global value and compare it with the best. And if our divergence that we've just computed is lower than the best, then we're going to store our embedding, which by default is stored in underscore embed. We're going to store it as the best embedding. And then on the other hand, if it's larger than the worst embedding so far, we're going to store it as embed worst on disk. And then we're going to append all of the values that we're going to store in a data frame. Okay, so this is for Hope, the same for Laplacian eigenmap, the same for node-to-vec. You can see there's the different parameters P and Q here. And we're storing everything in a data frame and then sorting the result with respect to either the local Jensen-Shannon divergence or the default is the global Jensen-Shannon divergence. Okay, so while I was explaining that function, we ran it for the Zachary graph, and this is what we're getting. So in this case, our best results are with the node-to-vec algorithm with respect to the global divergence, and calling this embed to layout function to get a two-dimensional representation. This is what our best global divergence embedding gives us in terms of two-dimensional visualization. The warning you can ignore. It's just a UMAP thing, but it will appear only once. If you rerun the code, it won't appear. And then this is with the largest, the result of the layout, sorry, with the largest global divergence. And you can see, it's an embedding, but, it doesn't seem to capture the communities, for example. And we've done the same for the small ABCD graph, so 100 node ABCD graph. So we've done the same thing, but this time we look at dimension 2 and 16, so a little higher dimension because there's 100 nodes in this case, more than in the Karate Club graph. And those are our best results. Again, in this case, node to vec is giving us the best global divergence score. So if we this is plotting, comparing the, yeah, this is comparing the global and local divergence score for the different, the different algorithms and the different choices of parameters. And you want to have low divergence in general, but you can, and there's good correlation, but you can see that you may have, for example, a very low global divergence, but not necessarily the lowest local divergence, and vice versa. So those two measures are really capturing two different things, right? And we're going to see that visually in the next couple of plots. So this is, for example, the embedding that gives us the best result with respect to global divergence. So, and you can see the communities are super well separated. I mean, there's no question here. This is very good if your main task is to group the communities together. But within each community, it's kind of a big blob, right? I mean, everything is kind of squished together. On the other hand, if you look at the local divergence, you can see that, well, the communities are not as tight, but this may be what you want. Inside each community, you have kind of subgroups that are, more tightly connected, but then you have between maybe this subgroup and this subgroup, there's not as many edges, so those are put further apart. This is what your local score is going to give you. And this is an example of a bad result with respect to the local divergence. Okay. So this is with respect to looking at the different embeddings with respect to visualization, layout, global and local divergence. Next thing we're going to do is to consider a task of classification. And we're going to be doing this on the ABCD1 graph. So by classification in this case, what we mean is that we want to recover the community, the ground truth communities, and we're going to be given a number of the nodes for kind of a subset of the nodes, the training set. We're going to have the true labels, so the true ground truth communities, and we're going to try to recover the ground truth communities for the other nodes. Right. So this is a very common machine learning task in vector space. And the advantage of doing embedding, one of the benefit of doing embedding is that you represent your points in the vector space, and then there's a lot of very efficient tools that can be used to do different tasks like classification. In this case, we have pre-computed a good embedding, 42 dimension running hope algorithm with this PPR similarity. So we're going to be reading the embedding from disk. It's already saved, and the our y value. So the value we want to predict are the ground truth communities. So we read the embedding. Those are our features, if you want, or our vectors in vector space, and y are the different categories, the different communities we're trying to predict. And then we're going to divide our data set into training and testing. So you can see test size is going to be 75%. So 25% of the nodes are going to be in the training set, which we're going to use to build a random forest classifier. So we're going to fit the classifier using the training data, and then we're going to predict the test data and compare this Y pred with the Y test, which is the actual ground truth communities. Okay, so this is an example of what we call a confusion matrix, where for each, sorry, for each of the label, the community value, the row gives us, how many nodes were predicted as being part of the correct community or another community. So the diagonal is really what you want here. So this is saying, okay, for the first community, we had 78 of the nodes that were correctly predicted, and those were predicted as other communities. For the second one, 77, but those nodes were predicted as other communities, one, and one here, for example. So a perfect classifier would give you everything on the diagonal. Another measure, of course, you can have is if you sum the diagonal and divide by the total number of entries, that gives you the accuracy, which is about 91% in this case. Is that good? Is that something we could easily get just by chance? Well, one quick thing we can try is to say, okay, if I give you the true number of classes, there's 12 community, and even their proportion. So how many nodes are in each class? But then I just put things randomly in communities. What would my accuracy be? And in this case would be about 8.8%. So you can see we're doing significantly better than just classifying things at random. Okay. So the next experiment is a little more involved. So we've kind of saved the results already. It's clustering. I'm going to do some clustering in embedded space, and we're going to. So this code is kind of commented out here, and we're just going to load the results. But what we're going to do is to compare different ways of doing clustering. So we can so it's going to be on the ABCD1 graph, and we're going to be doing some graph clustering. We saw graph clustering is already algorithms in the previous chapter. So lead-in and ECG usually give good results. But we're also going to do a few different things, right? See if we can take advantage of embedded space. So we're going to be seeding lead-in with the communities or the clusters we obtain using k-means, which is a very popular and very easy to use clustering algorithm in vector space or in embedded space. So we're going to be obtaining, initial clusters. We set arbitrarily k equals 100, and we're going to pass those as the initial clusters for the lead-in algorithm and see if that improved things. We're also going to compare with straight, clustering in the vector space using k-means. K-means, of course, you need to specify the number of communities, k. So we're going to try different values for k, including the correct, the true number of communities, which a priori in, a real application you would not know because you typically don't know the ground truth, of course. That's the whole point of doing clustering. To compare the clusterings, the different clusters, we're going to be using an unsupervised score, which is this variance ratio criterion or CHS scores. Those are scores to compute to evaluate the quality of the different clusterings. We're also going to be using the AMI, Adjusted Mutual Information, comparing with the ground truth. But of course, this is not something you would have in a practical application because you would not know the ground truth. Okay, so there's quite a number of things that are run in this cell here. So we repeat 30 times for each choice of k, for example, for k-means, and we run ECG, we run lead-in, we run k-means plus lead-in. So there's a lot of computation. You can uncomment this and run it. It would take several minutes, but we've loaded the results. And you can see in this case the best AMI for k-means, for example, is 0.95, and for lead-in is 0.99, ECG, k-means plus lead-in, all 0.99. So we can summarize all the results in a box plot because we've run things many times. We did 30 repeats, and you can see that what we're observing here is that if you do k-means in embedded space, if you're providing the correct number of communities, you can actually do quite well. I mean, above, the median is above 0.9, about 0.95. So you can do very well. This is using a graph clustering algorithm. Lead-in also does very well. ECG does very, very well in this case. But an interesting thing is that what we've done, seeding or initializing lead-in with some communities that we obtained in embedded space actually helped in this case. Okay, so this is completely different, well, completely three different ways of obtaining similar results. Embedding, clustering in embedded space. Those are using k-means in this case. Clustering in graph space, lead-in or ECG, and kind of a hybrid here, this k-lead-in, where we start from an embedding, from a clustering, sorry, in embedded space, and then use a graph embedding, graph clustering. I keep mixing the two terms. Another strategy we could use is in embedded space is to use the DB scan or HDB scan algorithm, which are some of the best uh, state-of-the-art clustering algorithm in vector space. Typically, they won't perform very well in high dimensions, so a common thing to do is to reduce dimension using UMAP. So this code is just here, okay, we're going to read our embedding, reduce it to 16 dimension, and then this is just looping over some parameters that are used by dbScan, namely this epsilon parameter. There's also a min sample parameter. We've tried a few values, and 8 gave us, reasonable results. And then we're going to compute, so looping over these different epsilon, we're doing the embedding here. So we're calling this dbScan and fitting it with our u, which are our vectors in 16 dimension in this case, and using this CHS score to keep the best embedding the best possible clustering, sorry. And let's see what we get. So in this case, one of the thing with dbScan or HDBScan is that some of the points are not going to be clustered. So there's kind of a refusal to cluster if things are, too far apart from other points, for example. And so those are called outlier points. And you can see if the outliers are removed, you can get very good results with this approach. So reduce dimension and call dbScan or HDBScan. But if you consider all the points, including the outliers, the results are not as good in this case. And the same with this is HDBScan, which is a variant of dbScan. Similar result, slightly worse in this case.